So the 2023 State of DevOps report is out, and I have one of its authors, Michelle Irvine, here talking to me. She's a technical writer at Google, and she contributes to the report. Thank you for joining me, Michelle. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so the Accelerate State of DevOps report, this is pretty exciting. We've had this report happen for a number of years. So if I bring up the site here, this is at dora.dev, and this is obviously a whole host of resources. But tell me about Dora. Dora stands for the DevOps Research and Assessment. And so this is basically a bunch of research and publications and resources and all kinds of insights around, obviously, DevOps. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, so Dora is a research team, and what we look at is different practices, capabilities that go into developing and operating software. So this definitely digs into a lot of very technical things. We have our technical capabilities, and we look at some of the core measures that we've created. But we can also we also look very broadly at cultural practices and different processes you can put in place in your team. And we use statistics to take a look at all of that and see how it actually affects your software delivery performance. Another thing that we look at is really some key outcomes like organizational performance. So this is like your revenue, customer satisfaction, and we're actually able to show how your software delivery feeds into those key outcomes.
Fantastic. And so you publish this report annually, which is now available, and you can download it from dora.dev.
Yeah, and the 2023 report. So every year there are a handful of things that we look at year over year and revalidate. And then also there's different things that we measure and ask about that change year to year. So we're able to kind of mix in some new stuff and take a look at some old stuff to see if it's still behaving in the same way or if we can see anything new and interesting.
Fantastic. So let's start with the bottom line up front. These are the key insights that were made from 2023. So first and foremost, having a healthy culture. I don't think anyone would argue with that. It's not just the technology that matters, but it's the people, the processes, the capabilities, user centricity, quality documentation, which I know that you care a great deal about, flexible infrastructure, and underrepresented groups.
Yeah, so for all of these different findings, we take a look at our key outcomes that we want to drive. So this is like your organizational performance, your team performance, and also your like individual's well-being. And these are 5 of the different things that we dug into this year. There's more in the report, so download it and take a look. But these are kind of some five that jump out.
So let's start with AI. Obviously, top of mind with a lot of folks. We got ChatGPT, we got large language models. Obviously, this is going to make a huge impact for developers and technical practitioners using AI, not only for code and for deployment, but also for doing a bunch of other things around the software development lifecycle. So the percentage of respondents here, though, I think the thing we have to clarify here is that the colors here determine, so dark blue is extremely important, and then light blue is not at all important.
Yeah, so we've got a question about AI here, and AI, everyone's talking about it. It is still early days. So where people are incorporating it, we think that it'll take some time to actually see how using AI kind of actually impacts work. What we see here is we've asked people about how important AI is to these different tasks, just to see if they're incorporating it into their daily workflow. And a couple things that we see from this is that you're kind of all in or all out. So teams that are incorporating it are incorporating it across the board or thinking about it across the board at least. And teams that aren't incorporating it are just not incorporating it. So that's interesting. And then in terms of its impact, again, early days, we see some findings around it, but this is a bit more of a baseline to see how this changes after this year.
So I guess the observation is to anticipate that it will take some time to adopt AI-powered tools. Obviously, this is the case. We see products like Copilot. You see this with other tools as well, like Bard, for example. There's a little bit of an adoption curve associated with that, but it's coming, I guess, is the summary.
It's coming, and in a lot of cases, it's here. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So moving on over to how do teams in our sample set compare So it's important to actually denote that when we take a look at software delivery performance, there are the sort of key metrics or measures that people use to determine these things.
Dora looks at some key outcomes that we want to drive. Organizational performance we look at every year. So this is again revenue and customer satisfaction. We also this year looked at team performance and personal well-being. Software delivery performance is another thing that we sometimes talk about as an outcome in and of itself. So this is a way to measure your software delivery, and this is something that Dora came up with years ago, and we include in the survey every single year to revalidate and just see how it's behaving. So what we see are kind of two different types of things. One is speed. So that's like how quickly you can get code out into production. So lead time for changes, and also deployment frequency. Those are the two numbers that we look at for speed. And then the other one is stability. So stability means like, is your code working? Is it running? Is it falling over? Are you constantly fixing it, right? So change failure rate, like how many failures make it out into production, like how many deployments are actually problems. And then also recovery time, so how quickly it takes you to recover from those failures. So one of the interesting things that Dora uncovered years ago and continues to revalidate is that these two different things, speed and stability, are actually mutually beneficial. So the faster you go, the more stable your system is. And we can think of that in a handful of different ways. I mean, even riding a bike, like the faster you are, the more stable you are, right? If you go too slow, you start to wobble. If you're releasing code once a quarter, once a year, more than once, like a year and a bit, the amount of debt that piles up before you actually see it in production can be tricky. And also, if you are only releasing infrequently, you might not be as familiar with rolling it back and fixing things in production. And so when you do that, it might take you some time to fix things as well.
Yeah, it certainly speaks contrary to what you see in software development teams, which is move fast and break things. I guess in that sense, it's not so much break things in production, but break things in terms of the architecture, et cetera. But that's actually really a good analogy that you provide, which is you're a lot smoother on your bike if you go a little bit faster. So I would agree with that largely. And another observation was obviously that teams with faster code reviews have 50% higher software delivery performance.
Yeah. So within the research, we take a look at those key outcomes, and then we also have an eye on these the software delivery performance metrics. And then there's a handful of other like processes and capabilities that we look at. So here we took a look at code review, and the speed of code review matters. So it really has a high impact on software delivery performance.
So it's talking about teams, obviously, when looking at the way in which teams are structured and the way that they're targeting building software for customers, obviously, there are a variety of ways in which you can, well, there are, I guess, common trends around the way that these teams actually operate. So user centricity, software delivery performance, operational performance, these are important aspects that I think Dora cares a great deal about when looking at this.
Yeah, absolutely. We look at these different aspects. Another thing that we do is we actually do cluster analysis. So this kind of spits out different buckets or groups of respondents. And in past years, we've used terms like low performer to elite performer, which can be a bit problematic because different teams are working under different contexts and with different constraints. And so the goal might not necessarily to be in the bucket that has been labeled elite, but is maybe to just work with the constraints that you have and perform better than you did last month. And so here we've done a cluster analysis, and we've found four different clusters within the data. And so we've grouped respondents into these different clusters. And these labels for them are a bit different than what we would normally see in terms of just like low to high. So we took a look at the way that they were behaving and named them in terms of kind of like the different attributes that they seem to be exhibiting.
Gotcha. And so, like, I think people need to take away from the fact that this is in some ways a Venn diagram, but it's looking at different aspects of the way in which teams are operating. So you've got the clustering for the types of things that are important to the team itself. So for operational performance versus user centricity, for example, and then the team type itself will be obviously clustered to different degrees based on this. So that's your findings in the report based on this. And then obviously when we think about performance metrics and thinking about the way that teams operates, the way that a team will operate, obviously there are side effects that can occur depending upon the way that those teams are operating. So this chart here talks to four key aspects of performance. So we're looking at the team type on the I guess the y-axis, and on the x-axis we're looking at the value of where those teams measure in terms of the different categorizations. So predicted organizational performance, predicted burnout, predicted team performance, and predicted job satisfaction.
Yeah, so you can see that these different teams have different outcomes for the different things that you look at. So, for example, burnout is a bit of a different one because a higher burnout is bad. um, so, so here you see a developing team, the one that we've named developing. You have people on the team burning out at a much higher rate. And then, for example, organizational performance, you can also see a difference in the different types. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like the candle that burns hottest is also the brightest, I guess, in some regards, using that analogy. So they have a high performance, but they also have a high predicted burnout as well. So that's interesting. That certainly speaks to my personal experience developing software. Is that if you're constantly doing a lot of development and you're in the weeds, so to speak, of the code, et cetera, and you're doing a lot of that sort of highly technical work, you definitely do feel tired a lot more. So it can be a challenge for sure. What's also interesting is that job satisfaction also is aligned to that as well. So you're seeing higher job satisfaction with say a developing team as well as with a user-centric team. User-centric makes a lot of sense to me because you're dealing with people and you're focused on individuals and organizations using your software. And so you're going to have a lot of satisfaction, obviously, when catering to that audience. I think the developing bucket is one that I would find myself in a lot of these metrics. So moving on, some of the key takeaways in this year's report. I wanted to get your take on some of the things. Obviously, as a technical writer, I'm sure you care a great deal about documentation, etc. But there's always going to be other aspects associated with this. So improving all the technology processes and capabilities won't help you succeed.
It won't help you succeed without a healthy culture.
Right.
So this goes into we study a handful of different things that will help your software delivery performance and also help your organizational performance. And cultural practices within your team, such as like a Western generative culture, and also like flexibility, knowledge transfer, all of those things feed into the key metrics that we're studying and also the key outcomes. So if you want to develop code and you want to get it out into production and you want it to be stable in production, then you need to build up a team that trusts each other and that works together, that's flexible about where people work and how they work, that share knowledge. And all of these things actually we can see in the data have concrete outcomes on your code quality, well, in production.
And you guys also looked at the sort of user centric aspect of a team.
Yeah. So how much the team is actually aware of and considerate of users' actual needs. So that has shown to be very good for team culture and also for the software delivery outcomes. Also, stability and security, like how stable the environment is and how secure the person feels within that team. And then also work distribution. So on a team, there's going to be some tasks that are a bit more burdensome or have a bit more toil. And then there are going to be tasks that are maybe a bit more interesting and high profile. And if you have formal processes to distribute that within the team, playing to people's strengths, but just making sure that everyone's working together, then that also shows to have a high impact on our key outcomes.
And you've reinforced this in some of the data that you've collected around the importance of culture being obviously important for various outcomes. And those outcomes here being represented by team performance, organizational performance, software delivery performance, and then operational performance. And you can see a generative culture ranks very, very highly across all four of those outcomes. Were there any surprises in terms of culture that you observed in the report?
I mean, year over year, we see these things have a high impact on software delivery performance and on the other key outcomes. So I'm not surprised as much as I am happy to be able to reinforce them.
Excellent. Yes. Yeah, the one outlier here that I immediately observe is work distribution does not help with software delivery performance. So it's like the old adage of you can't take nine engineers and create an outcome of something that would take 9 months, for example, to generate it in 1 month, for example. So work distribution doesn't really have much of if anything, it's a detriment to
Yeah.
software delivery performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are complicated systems, right? Like so there's so many different variables here. So that doesn't necessarily mean that if you have work distribution on your team, that in and of itself is going to pull your numbers down because you've got lots of stuff going on in your team, right? So the knowledge sharing, organizational stability, and then a bunch of the technical capabilities that we'll look at too. So a lot of these things do balance each other out. But yeah, we do see things like that. So works distribution, a negative impact on software delivery performance. Maybe there's more overhead talking about things. Maybe it is a bit slower if everybody's doing work that involves some toil.
Yeah, we need the hive mind going.
Yeah,
We need the ability to plug into everyone's brain and get everyone on the same page. So,
yeah,
but shifting from orgs and teams into individuals, obviously, this is important. Obviously, if you're an individual looking at these outcomes, and you're gonna feel a lot this viscerally and emotionally. So things like burnout, job satisfaction, productivity. Some of the standout ones for me, obviously, is a generative culture diminishes burnout highly
hmm,
and increases both job satisfaction and your productivity. So it's very important. Obviously, I would probably this aspect of culture is the most probably the most important relative to a team and individual basis.
yeah, absolutely.
And then work distribution, basically nil impact. So
For
it
burnout,
really doesn't help with burnout, maybe a little bit of satisfaction. And so one outcome, obviously, that's been observed is that teams with generative cultures have a 30% higher organizational performance. And then another observation is high levels of job security lead to a 61% reduction in burnout relative to those with low levels of job security. I think this makes a lot of sense.
yeah. That's one of the nice things about this research study too, is that we look at these different aspects of culture with our outcomes, and we can actually put numbers to them, right? We can quantify the impacts and effects.
User centricity is critical for organizational success, team performance, and employee well being. Makes sense. So have a user centric approach. And that speaks also in the observations that you've made as well. You can see the impacts of user centrism on team performance, organizational performance, software delivery performance, and operational performance, which is highlighted there.
User centrism is a thing that we've looked at for the first time this year. So this is kind of a new thing we've added into the mix. But in terms of year over year, there is some variation. Yeah, I think that if there's ever a large variation, which would be like a change in direction, right? Like something was showing to be positive for a handful of years, and then suddenly it seems to be behaving differently. We do try to call that out as a surprise.
Another observation is teams that focus on the user have 40% higher organizational performance. That's amazing. That's pretty impactful. That's
Yeah.
a key takeaway in my view.
Yeah, that's a big number because organizational performance, again, that's your revenue, that's customer satisfaction. And I'd also like to emphasize that when you're talking about DevOps here, we're talking about software delivery and running your software in production. The teams that we talk to and the people that respond to our survey are not necessarily working for technology companies. Like this is across the industry. So retail, financial, education, government, definitely technology as well. But all these different types of companies see increased organizational performance when the software that they rely on and the teams that working on this are able to deliver that software better. And in this case, we see when those teams have a focus on the user, whoever that user is in whatever industry, we definitely see a much higher impact on organizational performance.
Being a technical writer, we're about to touch on something that I know is very near and dear to your heart. But as a software engineer and practitioner, is always the bane of my existence, which is
Mhm.
documentation. So obviously, a lot of observations around quality documentation, timely documentation, etc. This is super important. I think most developers see it like flossing. We know we have to do it, but it takes a long time, and it's just away from the thing we want to do. But
Yeah.
talk a little bit about the importance of documentation.
Yeah, so we measure documentation quality. This is the third year that we've done it, and we're looking at internal documentation. So, as you said, it's the content that you as a developer would be writing and maintaining yourself, but it's also the stuff you rely on when you're trying to get something done, right? So, you're also a reader. And documentation quality by itself, just looking at that one construct, we see it having a positive impact on three of our key outcomes here. So, team performance, organizational performance, and operational performance. And then this is the second year that we actually see it have no effect on software delivery performance. So this is one of those surprises that we highlight, just because it's behaving differently from how we would have expected it to.
I
Yeah.
guess it depends, right? It's if you're writing software documentation for maybe a framework or a library, maybe, I'm not sure, but yeah, I can see this not having much of an effect on that. So,
Yeah.
if anything, it would be a negligible effect.
Well, it's also the documentation that you're using, right? So it's not
Right.
necessarily about you taking time out, though that's needed too to a certain extent. But yeah.
And obviously, you would speak highly of quality documentation. It's not just quantity.
Exactly, exactly. So what we ask about is like, can you rely on it? Is it like updated, and is it findable? Right. So it's not only that it's accurate and relevant, but you can actually find the content. Um, and we see for quality documentation, it's very tied to the technical capabilities that we look at, which makes sense because this is the sort of stuff it's describing, and it drives the implementation of every single one of these. So higher quality documentation, you're more likely to be implementing continuous delivery practices. On top of that, documentation also interacts with the continuous delivery practices. And so when we see these things happening together, we actually see an amplification of that tech capabilities impact on organizational performance. So, continuous delivery, if you're a team and you're able to implement that in an environment with poor quality documentation, totally possible. Um, that has an impact on organizational performance. But when you implement it with high quality documentation, that impact is 2.7 times higher. And if we scoot down to trunk based development, it's 12.8 times higher. So we just see the complicatedness of these models too, right? Like we've got a lot of different things in play. And so this research study lets us kind of look at a lot of them together and see how they interact.
Yeah, it's obviously nuanced and complicated, depending upon what aspect of your pipeline that you're looking at. If you're getting technical, I've always equated these to like the Rube Goldberg machines that you see on Bugs Bunny, etc. But documentation obviously helps with the understanding of a lot of these things and can help drive help drive an impactful performance. And another observation I think that was made was that obviously high quality documentation leads to higher team performance, but 25%, that's really impactful. That's huge.
Just goes to show that people can get their stuff done when they have the right information, right? Yeah. And also, if we think about toil or interruptions at work, um, it's work to write something down, but then once it's written down, it scales. So you don't need to be interrupted. Someone can read what you wrote, and many more people can read it than you would be able to have a quick chat with in the same day.
Shifting gears along the same idea of key insights, obviously a flexible infrastructure is super important. Cloud computing has disrupted a lot of, I guess, not only the cost model, but also the way you think about these aspects. There's a lot of stuff that is important, but having a flexible infrastructure through cloud computing is huge. I mean, it's monumental in the last decade what we've seen from companies like Google and Amazon and Microsoft introducing platforms that developers can take advantage of.
Yeah. So here what we're looking at is like, yes, are you using cloud computing, but also like how are you using it? Because if you're just treating it like a regular data center that you would be running and managing yourself, you're not necessarily seeing the impact that you could be seeing. So when you treat it as flexible infrastructure, so scaling up and down, being more dynamic, elastic, making sure it's accessible, measuring how you're using it, and making changes from that, then you see a much bigger impact from the use of cloud computing.
And you have obviously numbers to back this up. For example, using a public cloud leads to a 22% increase in infrastructure flexibility relative to not using a cloud. So don't
Mhm.
run your own data centers anymore. I guess that's
Well,
the idea here.
yeah. Well, so one thing about this report is we're tool agnostic, we're platform agnostic, right? So we're looking at the practices and like how you're doing things, but we're not specifically vetting a specific tool to do
Right.
these things. So this is platform agnostic for cloud. The flexible infrastructure, if you have your own data center and you are able to set it up so that it matches that flexibility, it's possible you might see the same benefits. The effort to do that by yourself in your own shop would
Yes.
be very big, right?
Yes.
So the economies of scale, like just being able to use a public cloud, like just opens up the ability to use it in a much more flexible way.
And we keep harping on this idea of organizational performance. Obviously, flexible infrastructure helps with that as well. 30% higher organizational, it's more impactful than documentation having flexible
Mhm.
infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't pay for workloads that you don't need. And right. And make sure you're able to keep your business running over times of peak demand.
So I think we can just summarize that flexible infrastructure helps. It's obviously something that you want to make sure that you're driving performance in a number of ways. So you're seeing team performance, you're seeing software delivery performance. If you're utilizing these things, that leads to those aspects as well. And that I mean, you're comparing basically apples and apples here. You're talking about cloud with flexible infrastructure versus cloud without flexible infrastructure. So you're basically it makes sense from that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then wrapping things up in terms of key takeaways, obviously, is representation. So, what is this all about?
So we one of the questions that we ask is whether or not people identify as being underrepresented on their team, and that could mean a varying amount of things.
Hmm.
Um, but we actually see some very different patterns for those respondents, and one of them is that they are taking on more toil and less work that's recognized, and because of that, that's driving a lot more burnout.
And so, to help culture, you want to make sure that that work is better distributed, that there's better recognition within teams to help amplify that sort of healthy culture aspect that we talked about in the first place.
Yeah. And also just a reminder that like um, some things that mitigate burnout for the majority of your team isn't necessarily working for everyone, right? So there might still be individuals on your team that are struggling or burdened with tasks that are very repetitive or unrecognized.
Fantastic. So, just to recap the key insights for 2023 from the State of DevOps report, healthy culture. Obviously, I think most people would agree that that's something that's super important, will help with your team's performance, your organizational performance. User centricity, put your users first. It will help with, obviously, job satisfaction and a variety of other outcomes that we talked about. Quality documentation, the bane of my existence, but not yours. So I will speak to that. I got to do better there. I know I have to do better there. Like I said, it's like flossing. Flexible infrastructure, having a flexible infrastructure will result in huge outcome performance wins. And then underrepresented groups to help prevent burnout and to ensure that not one individual on a team is not incurring a lot of toil and unrecognized work. Awesome. And I know that Dora obviously is not, kind of independent from everyone. They have a community. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, so there's a community of practice, which is people from all over the world get together to talk about different aspects of the research and also just the different struggles or wins or approaches from a practitioner's point of view. Because Dora does show a lot of things that you can do. It gives a good set of measures to be able to measure your software delivery performance. It has a lot of guidelines about different technical capabilities that you can implement, but the reality on the ground will be different for every team. And it's up to practitioners to actually put this stuff into action, right? For example, loosely coupled architecture is one thing that we look at, but to actually create a loosely coupled architecture, there's lots of different ways you can do this, right? So as you're focusing on continuous improvement within the context of your own team, the Dora community gives a community to talk to of fellow practitioners so that you can discuss problems or wins or different approaches.
So you can find out more at going to Dora.community. And yes, dot .community is a TLD. I always get tripped up by these TLDs. So Dora.community is the website. You can see a lot of information is there and really helps out with the community. I did want to take a second to talk a little bit about how Octopus Deploy is involved relative to all of these things. And so what I'd like to do is just briefly touch on some of the aspects that we talked to Michelle about. And so one of the things that you can do, obviously, through the Dora website is check out all the metrics. And we talk about metrics, for example. These are some of the questions that relate to things that help with software delivery. Just to that note, Octopus does have integration with Dora metrics through DevOps for insights available through the tool itself. These were introduced in 2022.3. And we can do this on both a project and also a space level. If you're looking for space level insights, this is available to customers on an enterprise subscription. And we measure 4 key Dora metrics. They're named a little bit differently, but they are deployment lead time, deployment failure rate, deployment frequency, and mean time to recovery. And if you haven't seen this before, they're really quite insightful. So project level insights are available as a new tab in every project, so you can understand the performance of your projects across channels, across environments, across tenants. And then each metric is available at a summary level, and then insights can be filtered to timeframes like last month or last quarter, and it can also be exported as a CSV. And then project level insights are available to all customers out of the box, meaning you don't have to buy or subscribe to another tool, but if you're already a user, Octopus maintains all that, and then you can also do that across the space as well. So if you want to find out more, you can check out our samples instance, which has insights enabled across a number of projects and spaces. You can read also more about our insights at octopus.com/docs/insights. Anyways, I would like to thank Michelle for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Michelle. The report is now available, the 2023 State of DevOps report. And I take it this is a nice sort of it's a nice feeling to have this out and into the hands of readers. Was there any personal sort of observations you made, or you must be happy that it's out now?
Oh yeah, very happy that it's out, and thrilled to hear the response from the community as well.
Fantastic. And so they can go to Dora.community if they want to submit their feedback. You can also check out Dora.dev. Awesome. Michelle Irvine, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for the chat.